Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another exciting episode of the Vinnie Eastwood Show, broadcasting from New Zealand, the fabulously fluoridated capital of Auckland, where the island-chained nation sun shines from the Fukushima coast, and everybody gets extra rays when they're trying to soak them up. And my very special guest today with them rays, is got a very uniquely pronounced name, and he really hates it when people pronounce it wrong. And many do. So I'm going to allow him to introduce himself as well. What is your name, sir?
Arik Rice.
Arik Rice. Now, it's not spelt the way you think it is. It's Arikriiss. Alright? Like with the essay from Mexico. Speaking of Mexico, it's one of the big things in the drug war and what have you. But anyway, he's the maker of the film DRUGLAWED, the documentary, which he is attempting to raise money for. So if you're listening to this right now, and you think for yourself to a moment, how many billions do we spend on the drug war? How many people's lives are we destroying day in, day out by simply not doing anything about the ridiculous drug laws? And you might think there would be quite a lot of money. You might think it might be quite a lot of pain and suffering. And you might think that, hey, maybe it would be a good idea if somebody made like a couple of really, really hard-hitting documentaries with experts interviewed all over the way and to wazoo and not hold anything back. Such a endeavour is very rarely supported by the establishment viewpoint. And it is you, ladies and gentlemen, that we ask humbly for your donations so that we can actually finish this film. Arik needs about $3,200 and he needs it in the next 22 days. If anybody out there has ever suffered personally at the hands of the drug law, you give him just a little something on his Kickstarter page, and we'll provide links with that on the audio archives and the YouTube videos and so on and so forth. But you can actually search it on Kickstarter, like, what was it, DRUGLAWED? Just search DRUGLAWED, LAWED, on Kickstarter, should be there. And better yet, go to druglawed.com, and everything's on there as well. Other than that, Arik, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Vinny.
Tell us a little bit about, the film and whatnot for the uninitiated.
Well, it started about 4.5 years ago, and I've been shooting thousands of hours of footage and editing for the last 3 years to condense a very complicated story into 100 minutes. But if you watch that 100-minute film, which will be released in the next couple of months, you'll know everything you need to know to completely crush any prohibitionist argument that you might encounter from ignorant people who haven't really understood the costs, the true costs of the drug war that was initiated about 40 years ago by the very nebulous President Richard Nixon.
The nebulous president? Could you describe the word nebulous in this context? I'm confused.
Well, Nixon was a very conspiratorial president, and he was running all kinds of black ops and psyops, and the drug war was one of his ops. That was basically a way of controlling the population through restricting the kinds of drugs that they were allowed to have legal access to, and also through criminalization of the drugs that they were likely to be using, so that in Richard Nixon's particular political agenda, to destroy the anti-war movement. So that's where our drug laws come from. They were basically a means of controlling the population. They had very little to do with public health. In fact, they had nothing to do with public health. That's all just a sham.
So, didn't Nixon say he wasn't a crook? And didn't he also accuse the people that accused him of being involved in conspiracies? Didn't he accuse them of being conspiracy theorists?
In fact, that's where the term conspiracy theory comes from. Richard Nixon was trying to deflect attention from the actual conspiracy that he was running to get information, inside information on the Democrats' campaign by bugging their campaign headquarters.
He bugged their campaign headquarters, mate. I didn't even hear that.
So, Nixon was a very crafty, very devious, very evil man, and this is who basically created our drug laws, the architect of our modern drug control system. We need to break free of that. We need to move forward and create drug laws that are fostering the best public health outcomes. That's the essential need for government to control drugs, to foster positive public health outcomes. Currently, we're spending billions of dollars cumulatively, trillions of dollars if you consider how many countries around the world have followed the US model, have been coerced into following the US model. We are finding there's more powerful, cheaper, and more prevalent narcotics of every stripe available every single day. You can't walk out your front door without tripping over a needle in some places, a heroin needle in some places in this town. So it's a very unsalubrious situation that the drug laws have created, and we need to be thinking about health, public health. Drug laws don't preserve the public health. They make the public health worse.
Specifically how?
Well, in the case of, let's say, cannabis, let's back away from the heroin example and talk about cannabis, which is what the film focuses on. If somebody actually does have a cannabis addiction and they get arrested, they're not going to get treatment, or they're very unlikely to get treatment in most cases, in a prison. In fact, when they are released from prison, they'll have now gone in with maybe an undergraduate degree in cannabis, and they may leave with a postgraduate degree in methamphetamine. They might be conscripted into a gang. They might be assaulted. They might have post-traumatic stress disorder from experiencing imprisonment. And if you try and find their victim, you can't. So they haven't actually hurt anyone.
My perspective is that the education system has a graduate course called prison. And that's a lot of the thing that's actually problematic about any kind of law, is that you wind up moulding people in certain ways, and it's usually got unintended side effects.
Yeah, the unintended consequences of the drug war, well, there's an entire chapter dedicated to that in our film, the film that we're trying to raise money for, DRUGLAWED, which you can see at DRUGLAWED.com. There's
nothing shameful about shameless self-promotion.
So in one of the chapters, we've divided the film into 10 chapters so that if you are an internet viewer, and we're making it free for everyone in the world to see this film, this is basically our attempt to help foster better public education, and we're not trying to profit from it. If we do, that would be great. It would be nice to make some of the money back, but we're going to release the film free, and if you watch part 6, which is entitled The Costs of the Drug War, you'll see it's the longest segment of the film, because the costs of the drug war and the knock-on consequences of the drug war are so numerous that we needed to spend about 25 minutes of our 90-minute film just talking about those costs.
Well, costs like what? Just monetary or human costs as well?
There are financial costs, there are social costs. If you look at the straight financial costs in New Zealand, a very small country, we're actually outspending the United States at a ratio of 2-to-1 or 3-to-1, depending on which numbers you choose. But at a minimum, we are outspending them by a factor of 2-to-1. And what
that's per capita.
Per capita, yes, per capita, exactly. There are only just over 4 million people in New Zealand, 320 million in the US, but we're still arresting people at a higher rate per capita, and we're still spending on the prohibition at least double per person arrested and processed through the criminal justice system. So if you break down that figure, and I'd like to remind international viewers, international listeners, that New Zealand is a tiny country, so these figures are monstrous if you compare it to the size of the country. $64 million spent each year in incarcerating cannabis-only offenders. Those are offenders with no violent history, no other convictions. So there's additional costs on top of that.
Well, think of a reasonable-sized city in the United States spending $64 million.
That's just on incarceration. It's $200 million on policing, excluding the costs of the Air Force and the Navy, who are also out patrolling for crops along the coast and inland by flying over in helicopter searches, and also in the eradication procedure. So you can add X million for those operations. Then you've got the costs of the court. You've got the cost of something like the Law Commission, which investigated these things and came up with a very well-rounded, very balanced report, very conservative report, advocating for the decriminalization of cannabis and the legalization of the medicinal use of cannabis. And that report was instantly binned, and the report itself cost a few $1 million to produce over a course of 3 years. I've got the exact numbers, but it was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it didn't cover the costs of advertising and promotion of the actual document that they produced. So then we have the costs of people who've lost their job now going on social welfare, draining the public coffers because they've lost their job due to an arrest or a dismissal because they've been caught with a small amount of cannabis, often a negligible amount of cannabis. You've got the cost of dependents of people who are incarcerated, claiming on social welfare because their breadwinner has been removed from their family. You've got the costs, the social costs to that family of losing a member of their family in a meaningless, pointless gesture of moralizing the law to suit your own political agenda by incarcerating a father who's otherwise a competent father and a family man. And I've met many people who've experienced this, and some of them are in the film, where a family member is ripped from his community, and a son now is, his entire life can be changed because he doesn't have a father figure. And then when his father returns to him several years later, that father will be psychologically damaged from the incarceration, won't be the same father that he was before he went inside, wouldn't have been able to provide for his family during the period that he was incarcerated, so the family then has to rely on the benefit. In some cases, the cost is even greater when the police seize the home under the Proceeds of Crime Act, and then this family now is reduced to a state of impoverishment because of state-sanctioned theft. And in many cases, people who have lost their homes are really innocent of the charges that the police bring against them. The police have a stock and trade technique of drumming up the charge as much as possible, because then it gives them the pretense to seize property under the Proceeds of Crime Act. So in the case of
it's about the money for them, isn't it?
It is all basically a money go round. The entire drug war can be summed up in 2 words: profit scheme. And
it's basic high school economics. When you cut off supply, you don't reduce the price, you make it skyrocket.
Exactly. Creating the black market that we see all around the world. The 3rd largest black market on earth, by the way. The first being arms, the second being the illegal oil trade. So number 3, valued at $350 billion a year, accounting for a large percentage of world trade, is the illegal drug trade. Thank you, Richard Nixon.
Yeah, it's an old story, and it just keeps getting told over and over and over again. Don't you think that people are just kind of like sick of hearing about the drug war, even sick of hearing about protests about it?
People have become numbed to the message, even though the message has been on key basically since the earliest days of normal in the United States. They've been saying exactly the same thing, and even though it's filtering through slowly, it's not filtering through to the general population quickly enough. So that's what this film is about, helping people understand the minutiae of the argument so that there's no more debate about it. This basically is going to end the debate. So the debate about whether to legalize cannabis, at very least, is over. It is over. The United States government has acknowledged that by allowing the legalization of marijuana in Colorado and Washington states.
Technically, the United States didn't allow that. The states just do it themselves because they have something nobody in New Zealand has: sovereignty.
Somewhat, yeah. They have a small degree of sovereignty, but in the case of Colorado and Washington, Attorney General Eric Holder, and we cover this in the movie Drug Lord, wrote a memo saying that the federal government will not seek prosecutions against legalized distribution of marijuana in those states when it does not contravene the state's own laws. So that's basically saying, go ahead, we are not coming after you.
Did that stop the DEA in California with all the coffee shops? And Green Cross and all of that?
No, it did not. It did not. So we're taking a wait-and-see attitude, but it looks like Obama has given up the ghost on the drug war. Obama, let me just clarify something. Obama is no friend to the international marijuana community, and I say that despite the fact that he was a prime member of the Choom Gang in Hawaii growing up. He was notorious for being a hardcore pothead, stoner, reefer blazing dude. He was at the center of that kind of activity at his high school growing up.
Sounds like presidential material to me, because you have to be a career criminal.
Yep. Well, they say marijuana is the gateway drug. It's the gateway to being president of the United States of America, because the last 3 presidents, and probably a few before, including John F. Kennedy, used to do that in their youth. John F. Kennedy was probably doing that throughout the entire time he was president before he was assassinated. So, I'm sorry. Gateway to being the first 4 presidents of the United States, George Washington and the next 3, all smoked pot. There's references to them doing it in their journals. They were all hemp farmers, incidentally. So, yes, the United States of America that gave us this prohibition has a very, very deep history and relationship with the cannabis plant. So, where these prohibitions came from, it's a strange glitch that started about 1937, if you want to pinpoint where this historical glitch happened. But for the previous 10,000 years, humanity has coexisted with this plant like no other plant on the earth. It is the most useful plant on the planet.
If I take a sledgehammer to your computer and say it's not working anymore, is that a glitch? Because that's what they did, bro. Yeah,
it was more than... I'm talking about a glitch in terms of historical time and humanity's relationship with the plant over the past 10 or 12,000 years, in fact.
Technically, humanity's relationship with the plant never changed, because as far as I know, the drug law didn't stop anybody from smoking squat.
Well, it did change, because the drug laws have caused incarceration and widespread social strife. They've even caused disease outbreaks. So,
didn't it also cause higher drug use?
Oh, drug use has skyrocketed. In fact, if you look at the graphs which show where the drug laws were initiated around the 1970s, you see a massive surge in drug use from that time continuing. And the more strident the drug laws are, the greater the drug use in any society, which is why we find that in Portugal and the Netherlands, where they've decriminalized the personal use and possession of drugs, drug use has declined quite markedly, especially amongst the youth, which is, of course, the whole reason why the vast edifice of these drug laws exist, to protect our children. Well, if you want to protect your children from drugs, you must decriminalize them, which decreases the likelihood of them using these drugs. So the entire patriarchal system of drug control is an absolute and abysmal failure in every single way.
Let's count the ways, shall we?
It's only a 3-hour show, Vinny.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I mean, the whole documentary that you spent goodness knows how many years compressing into like the best freaking work of exposing the scumbaggery of the drug law the world has ever seen has taken goodness knows how long. So, we're not going to be able to list them all. I don't know, do you have like a short list, like bullet points and what have you?
Bullet points? Can we go country by country here? Because... as the documentary points out, the drug laws have affected directly at least 156 countries on this earth that are the signatories to the UN conventions, which are basically a facsimile of the United States drug policies. And the United States thought it would be a great idea if all the countries in the world would sign on to their version of drug hell, essentially. Although I should point out there were some countries that were directly conquered through military invasion that didn't sign these drug laws, but the US didn't have to worry about that because they were an occupying force and they simply changed their local laws directly. They also did that in Japan, where in fact hemp is still grown and continued to be grown throughout the prohibition just for the use of the emperor's clothing. So there was an exception made just for the emperor and a farm in a town called Asomara. Aso is Japanese for hemp. It basically means hemp village. They continued to grow despite the fact that it was illegal throughout Japan in all its forms. So the emperor was the only one who was legally allowed to use some form of cannabis, if only as clothing.
I guess he was the asshole.
Well, no, the Americans were the assholes. But I'm just pointing out how essentially the influence of America is either indirect through political and diplomatic pressure, or direct through military invasion, through occupation. And I think, I hate to bash America, and I have nothing against our American listeners out there, and God bless you all. I hope you stand up and take control. I'm just getting off topic a bit, but your government's gone fucking crazy. Are we allowed to swear on the show, Vinny? It doesn't matter.
Guess you can. I guess
so.
You can.
So rail it in, and the whole system that we've imported from there. That's the essential problem. We've imported a failed system.
You know what we should have done? Instead of importing their drug policy, is just import the drugs that they grow.
Well, they're actually not a huge... except for meth. They're not a huge...
Maybe not so much meth.
Yeah. They're California, Humboldt County.
I'm talking about in terms of what we'd like to import to New Zealand,
Right. Well, in terms of though, to break it down, their consumption rates are much higher than their production rates. They're the world's number one consumer of drugs by far, and that's despite having these strident drug laws in place to supposedly curb the consumption of drugs. Well, your drug laws are strident and your drug use is out of control. Can you not figure out the connection?
What percentage of the world's heroin was being grown in Afghanistan the year before the US invasion?
Very small percentage.
I believe it was 1%. And what percentage were they exporting 1 year after the US invasion of heroin from Afghanistan?
I'd guess at about 25%.
It was like around 75 to 90%.
Wow.
Climbing over the next few years.
Really? Wow.
It's my contention that unless that heroin was frickin' illegal, the CIA wouldn't be able to get a whole lot of money for black ops, so they could just sell all these drugs on the streets to all these dealers and pass them out in the black communities. And
absolutely,
hey, beautiful.
Absolutely, they did that. It's documented at Air America, where they were using cargo planes to fly guns into Laos and Cambodia, fly out with packed with heroin. They were selling the heroin to their own GIs when they were on leave in Laos and Cambodia. So, the CIA has been doing this since the CIA was born. And the CIA has a huge role in the drug war as well.
Does it have a huge role in the film?
No, we couldn't cover everything. We do though take a look at FBI Director Louis Freeh's involvement in New Zealand drug laws, and how he paid a personal visit to then Prime Minister Jenny Shipley and put the hard word on her that she needed to toughen up on the cannabis laws, despite being advised by her Health Select Committee that the cannabis laws needed to be changed and reformed. And she said at first, her first reaction to that advice was, yes, we're going to take a good look at this. This is a serious matter. And within a few days, Louis Freeh had showed up and had this private meeting with her, and they made a joint statement to the press soon after that meeting. I don't know if it was directly or if it was the following day, but soon after they made a joint statement to the press that the cannabis laws in New Zealand were going to be toughened because they need to send a strong message that there's a zero tolerance policy and cannabis is a deadly drug, etc., etc. All the old lies were trotted out for the press, who lapped it up because the New Zealand press doesn't actually engage with the fucking... Sorry, I swore again. Now I'm going to go on a rant about the New Zealand press, but yeah, you know, I feel like I'm in a bit of a war without bullets. You know, I hope that we win. I hope that the side of sense and decency and love and community prevails in this war, the spiritual war that we're experiencing now.
I think it's a public awareness war as much as anything, really. I think if people had known the truth, you know, from the outset, what's this marijuana stuff? Well, it's cannabis. Well, frick, I'm not outlawing that. I use cannabis all the time. My doctor treats me with it and everything. I make my clothes out of it. I frickin' feed my kids with it. I use my animals for feed.
Animal feed,
for
animal
frack's
bedding.
sake, you know, I can build my frickin' house out of that stuff. And you're telling me that it's a good idea to make it illegal? Okay, just because you call it a fancy name, marijuana, which means Mary Jane, which is Mary and Jane, you know? I think, well, what do you think?
Great trick. It was a fantastic trick, because many of the people who voted for that law had no idea that they were using cannabis and that they were making their own medicine, their own clothing, their own building material, their own etc. illegal. They had no idea it was the same substance that they were talking about. And I just want to drop in a little nugget from history at this point about where this term comes from. And everybody knows it was Randolph Hearst who popularized the term. But why he made that particular selection, that particular word, features in the song La Cucaracha. And that was the song that was being sung by the soldiers of Pancho Villa, who nationalized huge swathes of Randolph Hearst's forests in Mexico, which he had bought up to make paper. And so not only did he hate Mexicans for doing this, he was already a racist, but he particularly hated Mexicans because they took control over this land that he had probably bought up dirt cheap through some shady deal with the Mexican government that Pancho Villa overthrew. So he took the word used in their song, in their freedom anthem, and he popularized that word as this ulterior word for this new killer Mexican loco weed. So it was no accident that he called it that. He had a bone to an axe to grind with those particular Mexicans, with that particular subgroup of Mexicans, yeah, and he ground it pretty well.
I was just trying to steal some land, that's it.
So yeah, the tree connection, the forestry connection, then of course many people know about, was because of paper and the success that cannabis was finding with new technology in the paper making process, and Hearst wouldn't allow the competition. So,
don't you find that kind of ironic? How it was a war between paper and weed.
It was a war between, resources.
Yeah, but don't they kind of need each other, you know?
Yeah, they do indeed. But, very clever people, very insidious people have created the system that we're living in today. These people are all dead. Nixon's dead, Hearst is dead, Ansling is dead, but their ghosts are still in charge. You know, they have more power now in terms of shaping the world than they did when they were alive, just because of their legacy.
You know, what occurs to me now is that so many people have left a legacy, so many people have left a mark on the world, marks that may never actually ever go away.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and like war, for example. It just never freaking ends. It's always going on. Why? Because, there's a whole bunch of people in the military-industrial complex who want all the money in the world and don't really want to share it, so they've found a convenient way to do both. Kill all the people that might share their wealth and make wealth while they're killing them.
Absolutely. War is the number one business on this planet. By far. There's not even a close second.
Drugs, you know.
No, you got to get down.
Especially the
oil, then drugs. Let's...
But it is gold, oil, and drugs. Those are our gold, oil, drugs. Yeah.
But in terms of how the drug war ties in with the military-industrial complex, now it's overt. You've actually got a slave labor force in American prisons and in UK prisons as well, who are being paid $2 a day to manufacture the parts of weapons that go into bombs that get dropped on other countries. So Halliburton and the Carlyle Group not only bilk the taxpayer by not having to pay taxes on their slave labor force, who they are paying a tuppence to produce these weapons, but then Halliburton can then drop bombs on US citizens, which they've done through error, and they still get paid for those bombs. They still get paid. It's not like that the US taxpayer can demand a refund when Halliburton accidentally kills some of American soldiers in now Afghanistan, and they're still in Iraq, even though the war is technically over. But this has happened where they bombed their own soldiers. It's not like the US taxpayer can demand a refund on the cost of those bombs. You know, that money's in Halliburton's bank account. So, sorry guys, we dropped bombs on our own guys. Too bad, we still get paid.
Now, if we're talking about the military-industrial complex, I mean, Eisenhower warned people about this, didn't he? You know, he doesn't say, hey, well...
This is his final address to the American people.
I mean, just think about that. You know, my last chance to tell the American people something, and instead of saying, thank you, I've been a great president or anything, he says, I'm warning you, there's a bunch of criminal scum who can have a huge quantity of stuff. Oh, we've got a phone ringing. And who can basically take over the country and enslave all of you. That was the last thing he decided to tell people as President of the United States. And they completely ignored him. Didn't they?
Yeah, they did. And
as a result of them ignoring the warnings, you now have an enormous system where the exact thing that he warned against happening has already happened. There are military-industrial scumbags in charge of everything. You know, isn't that the way of things, ladies and gentlemen? That every single time that somebody gives you some really good advice, you ignore them and keep doing what you're doing anyway.